Her husband left her pregnant and broke, but she turned the tables in court and left him speechless. The church had been filled with warm light, fragrant white roses, and the murmurs of guests whispering about how perfect they looked together. At the altar, in a tailored black suit, he grinned at her as she walked down the aisle in a delicate lace dress, clutching her bouquet with trembling hands. To everyone watching, it was the start of a beautiful love story. But only she noticed how his hand didn't squeeze back when they held hands, how his eyes didn't linger on hers during the vows. She brushed it off as nerves, convincing herself that cold hands were just a sign of a warm heart. He promised to love, honor, and protect, but those words were just air to him, spoken with the same ease he reserved for lies. They bought a small house 2 months after the wedding. She was the one who painted the kitchen cabinets while he played games in the living room, claiming his job was too stressful. She worked part-time at a florist shop, stacking bouquets and arranging centerpieces with care, even while feeling the weight of the household on her shoulders. He never once cooked dinner. He'd laugh when she talked about starting her own small online business, calling it cute before suggesting she focus on keeping the house clean instead. Still, she kept believing. Maybe once the honeymoon phase settled, he would show his better side. Maybe love needed patience. But what she didn't see was that his vows had already expired in his mind the moment he said them. Their arguments started small. He'd come home late and shrug when she asked where he had been, claiming he didn't like being interrogated. If she cooked dinner and he didn't feel like eating, he'd scoff and say, "I'm not your child. Stop acting like my mother." At first, she apologized. She didn't want to be the nagging wife. But over time, his indifference became colder. He stopped texting during the day. He barely looked up when she spoke. The distance between them stretched like an invisible thread pulling tighter every day, threatening to snap. She started walking on eggshells around him, trying to read his mood before speaking, afraid of triggering another one of his cold dismissals. She knew something had shifted irreversibly the night he canceled their anniversary dinner. She had dressed up, lit candles, cooked his favorite meal, and waited with anticipation. But he walked in 2 hours late, smelled faintly of a woman's perfume, and said flatly, "Don't make a big deal. It's just another day." He didn't touch the food. He didn't even look at her. She sat at the table alone, a fork still in her hand, and stared at the untouched candles as tears welled in her eyes. That night, she lay awake beside him, his back turned, wondering when the love had vanished, or if it had ever really been there at all. The day she found out she was pregnant, her hands trembled holding the test. Despite everything, a fragile smile broke across her face. She imagined tiny fingers, soft cries, bedtime stories. A piece of her, a new purpose. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the beginning of something better. She waited until dinner, nervous but hopeful. As he scrolled through his phone, she placed the test gently on the table and whispered, "I'm pregnant." He didn't look up immediately. When he did, it was with a flat stare. "And what do you want me to do with that information?" he said, setting his phone down like she had ruined his evening. She blinked, stunned. I thought we'd be happy. That you'd want this." He scoffed. "You? Raising a kid? You can't even keep the house in order without crying about it." His words hit like a slap. That night, he slept in the guest room for the first time. From that point on, he stopped touching her completely. The warmth she'd hoped for vanished. Her mornings became colder. He refused to discuss baby names. Refused to go to doctor appointments. He didn't ask how she was feeling, and when she brought it up, he replied, "You got yourself into this. Don't expect me to fix it." Every time she felt the baby kick, a part of her smiled, and another part quietly broke. It started subtly. Her best friend stopped calling as often after he told her, "You talk too much to people who don't respect our marriage." Her phone mysteriously deleted text messages. He claimed it was a glitch. Her family noticed she had become quieter, more withdrawn, but when they asked, she gave them the same answer every time, "I'm just tired." And she was. Tired of being dismissed, tired of questioning her worth, tired of hoping. He didn't allow visitors without informing him first, and when her sister stopped by unexpectedly one weekend, he made a scene, yelling that she didn't respect boundaries. After that, her sister never returned. Financially, things got worse. She asked if they could start saving for the baby. He laughed. "Save what? We're already wasting enough money on vitamins and checkups." She offered to pick up extra shifts at the florist shop, but he said it would be selfish for her to leave the house in her condition. She didn't realize he had changed the bank account passwords until she went to buy groceries and her card was declined. He handed her $40 and said, "Make it last. You don't need anything fancy." That night, she looked at herself in the mirror, hollow eyes, trembling hands, growing belly, and wondered where the woman in the wedding photo had gone. It was his cousin's birthday. She didn't want to go, but he insisted. "Don't embarrass me by acting like a depressed wreck." So she put on a maternity dress that barely fit, did her makeup with shaky hands, and walked into the restaurant beside him. The room was filled with laughter and champagne flutes. People looked at her with that strange mix of pity and curiosity. Someone asked about the pregnancy, and before she could respond, he answered first. "Well, let's hope she figures out how to be a decent mom, right?" Everyone laughed. She forced a smile, but her hands were trembling under the table. Later, when she tried to excuse herself to the restroom, he pulled her arm sharply and said through gritted teeth, "Stop acting like you're special just because you're pregnant." She whispered, "You're hurting me," but he didn't care. As she left the table, a relative smirked and muttered loudly, "Guess this is what happens when you marry beneath you." She heard it. Everyone did. But no one stood up for her. In the restroom, she stared at her reflection again, trying not to cry. Her baby kicked gently. It was the only response she had. The room was quiet, but inside her, the seed of something was beginning to grow. It wasn't anger, not yet, but it was close. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when she placed the ultrasound picture on the fridge, a tiny silhouette floating in a sea of black. She wanted to surprise him, something gentle to remind him that this was real, that there was still time to care. But when he came home, he barely glanced at it before saying, "Take that down. It's depressing." She stood silently, holding a plate of food she had kept warm for hours. "Why won't you even try to be involved?" she asked. His answer was short and sharp, "Because I didn't ask for this." "You did." The words lingered like smoke in the room. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow as he snored in the other room without guilt. A week later, she found him in the garage, tearing up a folder. When she asked what it was, he said nothing. Only after he left for work did she notice that her prenatal documents were missing, appointment schedules, insurance details, everything. All shredded. She sat on the garage floor with pieces of paper in her lap, the edges like razors. She didn't have the energy to scream. She didn't even have the strength to ask him why. She knew. This wasn't forgetfulness or frustration. This was deliberate. the man she married wanted to erase the proof of what they had created together. And for the first time, she didn't cry. She just stared at the fragments and made a silent promise to herself. This would be the last time she let him take anything from her without a fight. She was 7 months pregnant when he finally said the words that had been hanging in the air for months. "I'm done," he muttered, tossing a duffel bag into the hallway. She watched, frozen, as he moved through the house, grabbing clothes, keys, and his phone charger. No apologies. No hesitation. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice low, not begging, just tired. He looked her in the eye for the first time in days and said, "Anywhere that isn't here." And then he left. No explanations, no final conversation. The door closed behind him like the end of a chapter she never wanted to write. She sat on the living room couch with her swollen feet propped on a pillow, staring at the door for hours, as if he might come back and say it was a mistake. But midnight came and went, and her phone remained silent. The next morning, his name was gone from their shared bank account. She tried calling, only to find her number blocked. She checked the closet, half empty. The toothbrush he used, the coffee mug he loved, all gone. The baby kicked, a slow gentle flutter beneath her ribs, like a question, where did he go? She had no answer. Only a belly full of life, an empty house, and a heart stretched so thin it barely beat. She was on her way to a free clinic downtown when her vision blurred. At first, she thought it was just fatigue. The walk had been long, her feet swollen, her back aching under the weight of the baby. But as she stepped onto the curb, everything around her tilted. She heard the honk of a car, distant voices, and then her body gave out. She hit the pavement hard, one arm cradling her belly instinctively. When she opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed, wires on her wrists, machines beeping steadily nearby. A nurse smiled at her gently and said, "You passed out from exhaustion and stress. You need to rest. Both of you." She reached down, touched her belly, and felt the kick. Relief flooded her chest, but it was quickly replaced by fear. "How am I supposed to rest?" she whispered. She had no job, no savings, no family nearby. The nurse hesitated before asking if there was anyone they could call. Her eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "No one," she said softly. She left the hospital a day later, discharged with strict instructions for bed rest and a warning that the baby could come early if she didn't take care of herself. But there was no one to help her, no money for delivery or supplies. Her world felt like a trap with no exits. And still, she kept walking forward, because she had no other choice. When the contractions started that night, she panicked. They were mild but sharp enough to freeze her mid-step. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing through the pain, gripping the sheets. She reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over his name, still saved in her contacts, even after everything. She hesitated, then tapped it. The call didn't ring. It went straight to voicemail. Her heart raced as she tried again, same result. Desperate, she texted, "I think I'm in labor. Please. Just tell me what to do." She stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 dots to appear. Nothing. The reply came the next morning. It was just one line. "Don't contact me again. That's your problem." She read it over and over, numbness spreading through her chest like frost. She sat at the kitchen table, one hand on her stomach, the other on the phone, and whispered, "How could you?" But there was no one to hear her. That morning, she brewed tea with trembling hands, pretending she still had strength. But deep down, she was beginning to accept what she had feared for months. She was truly alone, and the man who should have stood beside her had not only abandoned her but seemed determined to make her feel worthless on his way out. She returned to the hospital 2 days later, not for contractions, but because she hadn't eaten in almost 48 hours. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, and the nurse who admitted her asked, "Where's the father?" She didn't answer. She just turned her face toward the wall. A few hours later, the same nurse returned with soup and warm bread, sitting beside her without saying a word. After a while, the nurse gently asked, "Would you like to talk to someone? A legal counselor, maybe?" The words hung in the air like an invitation. She blinked, startled. "Why would I need a lawyer?" she asked. "Because," the nurse said softly, "what he did to you might not be just cruel. It might be illegal." That night, a woman in a gray blazer came to her hospital room. She introduced herself as a legal advocate for women abandoned during pregnancy. She listened carefully, didn't interrupt once, and then said, "You have more rights than you think. And you have a strong case." It was the first time in months someone had used the word strong in relation to her. A flicker of warmth returned to her chest, something unfamiliar, hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she had a direction. She was done waiting. Done asking. Done begging. The fight was just beginning. The legal advocate returned the next morning with a folder in a calm but firm tone. She explained how abandonment during pregnancy could be classified as neglect, and how financial support could be enforced retroactively. Each word landed like a stone being laid to build a foundation beneath her broken world. For the first time, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like someone with a case. The advocate mentioned a network of pro bono attorneys who specialized in family law. "You're not invisible," she said. "He may have walked away, but the law won't." The words stirred something inside her that had long been silent, dignity. Back home, with trembling hands, she opened her laptop and began organizing everything she had. Photos of the house, texts where he mocked her, emails with bank notifications, even receipts of hospital visits he never paid for. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival and justice. Every document became a brick in her fortress. She stayed up late printing, sorting, and remembering. Remembering every night he walked in with perfume on his shirt. Every moment he dismissed her fears. Every cruel comment that stripped her self-worth. Now, she was documenting it all, not to punish, but to protect the child inside her. She was done being quiet. Her days shifted. Mornings were filled with warm oatmeal and vitamins, but her afternoons were spent reading legal guides, studying custody laws, and highlighting terms like co-parenting rights and spousal abandonment. Her lawyer, a sharp yet kind woman named Gloria, visited her once a week. Gloria always brought a stack of papers and a steady voice. "He thinks you won't fight back," she once said while adjusting her glasses. "Let's prove him wrong." The baby's due date was getting closer, and so was the first court filing. She didn't have money for a suit or a briefcase, but she had something better, truth. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of what she was carrying, both physically and emotionally. Still, she got up each day, repeating a single phrase in the mirror, "You're not broken. You're rising." She stopped wearing makeup. She stopped pretending everything was fine. Instead, she focused on strength, one day at a time. Gloria reminded her that courts didn't just see income, they saw integrity, effort, resilience. And she had all three. The old version of her, the silent, hesitant one, was fading. In her place, a woman with a mission was taking form. Not just a mother. A fighter. The night she went into labor, she was alone again, but not afraid. Her hospital bag had been packed for 2 weeks, every detail prepared with care. When the contractions intensified, she breathed steadily and called for the ambulance herself. There was no panic in her voice. Only resolve. Hours later, she held her baby girl for the first time, tiny, warm, and blinking up at her with wide, curious eyes. She named her Hope. Because that's what this child had become. Not a symbol of loss, but of resilience. She didn't weep when the nurse asked about the father. She simply said, "It's just us." Hope was healthy. A strong heartbeat, a calm cry, and fingers that curled around her mother's thumb like they had always belonged there. The hospital let her stay 2 extra nights due to her situation. Nurses rotated in and out, offering help, leaving blankets, and whispering soft encouragements. Some of them had heard her story. Others just saw the quiet strength in her posture and treated her with gentle admiration. When she was discharged, Gloria met her at the entrance. She didn't say much. Just helped her carry the car seat and said, "Let's get him served." And with that, a new chapter had begun, not just in motherhood, but in the pursuit of accountability. The apartment was small, but it smelled like lavender and baby powder. She had transformed the cramped bedroom into a nursery corner with hand-me-down blankets, borrowed furniture, and a paper mobile she made herself. Hope slept soundly through the day, and though the nights were long, they were filled with quiet lullabies and whispered promises of a better life. Between feeding, changing, and rocking her daughter to sleep, she stayed connected with Gloria. Emails, updates, scanned documents. Her case was moving forward. Slowly, but surely. She sold her engagement ring to pay for diapers and formula. The wedding dress she once kept folded in a hope chest was now listed online, priced for quick sale. Every item from her past that held him in its threads was removed. She needed the space, and more than that, she needed peace. She began taking online surveys for pocket change, applying to remote jobs, and writing blog posts for parenting websites. Little by little, she was building a life. Not the one she had planned, but one she could be proud of. And in the quiet hours, when the world was dark and her baby curled against her chest, she whispered, "One day, you'll know why we had to go through this." It arrived in a plain white envelope, tucked inside her mailbox between coupons and bills. When she opened it, her hands shook, not from fear, but from anticipation. The document was official, a court summons for a paternity and custody hearing, with her name listed as the petitioner. She reread it several times before placing it gently on the kitchen table beside Hope's pacifier. Gloria called later that day. "It's happening," she said. "This is your moment to be heard." A date had been set. 3 weeks away. Enough time to prepare, but close enough to stir her nerves. That evening, she took out every file she had assembled. Printed text messages, screenshots of his disappearance, evidence of financial abandonment, proof of her medical visits, all lined up like soldiers on a battlefield. She wasn't afraid of seeing him again. She had already seen the worst parts of him, and they no longer had power over her. What scared her more was the idea of being misunderstood, of the system not believing her. But Gloria assured her the case was strong. "He may have left," she said, "but we're about to make sure he never forgets the price of walking away." And so, she began rehearsing her words, not to hurt him, but to protect what mattered most, her daughter's future. When he received the court summons, he didn't call, didn't apologize, didn't even ask why. Instead, he posted a smug photo on social media holding a drink in one hand and typing, "Some people don't know when to move on." He made jokes with his friends in the comments, calling her a bitter ex playing the victim. Word got back to her through someone who still followed him. She didn't respond. She simply added a printed copy of that post to her file. It wasn't just arrogance. It was proof of how little remorse he had, how proudly detached he had become from the consequences of his actions. A few days later, he replied officially to the court filing through his lawyer. In the response, he denied paternity, claimed she was trying to trap him financially, and stated that she knew he didn't want kids from the beginning. The words were cruel and empty, but she no longer flinched when reading them. She highlighted the most harmful phrases and sent them to Gloria. "He's digging his own grave," the lawyer replied. "We'll let him keep going." Her baby slept soundly in the next room as she closed her laptop. The man who left her pregnant and broke still thought this was a game. But soon, he would learn she wasn't the same woman he once walked out on. The weeks leading up to the hearing became a blur of preparation. Gloria coached her on how to answer questions with clarity and composure. They reviewed every document again and again, making sure nothing had been missed. At night, after Hope fell asleep, she would sit at the kitchen table, reciting statements aloud, imagining every possible scenario, every insult he might throw her way. She wasn't preparing to fight him with anger. She was preparing to fight him with facts. Her story had no holes, no dramatics, just truth. And in court, truth could be powerful, if delivered with control. She borrowed a blazer from a neighbor and printed fresh copies of every piece of evidence. She even practiced walking with confidence into the courthouse, though her knees still trembled in private. Her daughter deserved a mother who stood tall, not one who cowered. As the court date approached, she felt an unexpected calm settle in her chest. It wasn't arrogance. It was clarity. No matter how expensive his lawyer was, no matter how smug his face looked across the room, he couldn't undo what he did. He could lie, yes, but this time, she would not remain silent. This time, someone would finally listen. The courtroom was colder than she expected, polished wood, high ceilings, and the quiet hum of whispers from other waiting cases. He arrived late, dressed in a suit too sharp for a man who hadn't even paid a dime toward his child's birth. When their eyes met, he smirked, as if she was an inconvenience he had come to swat away. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something, and he chuckled quietly. She didn't react. She held Hope's pacifier in her hand like a talisman, grounding herself in the reason she was standing there. She wasn't there for revenge. She was there for her daughter's right to be acknowledged. When the judge called their names, she stood and walked forward, her steps steady despite the storm inside her chest. The bailiff swore her in, and Gloria stood beside her like a shield. His lawyer opened with a confident tone, painting him as a man taken advantage of, trapped by a woman he barely knew, manipulated into fatherhood. The words stung, but she didn't interrupt. She waited. Because when her moment came, she would not speak with emotion. She would speak with evidence. And when that happened, the silence in the courtroom would speak louder than anything he had ever said. When it was her turn to speak, the courtroom quieted. Gloria asked her to describe the abandonment. She answered each question calmly, her voice clear and unwavering. She detailed the moment he left, the financial freeze, the blocked calls, the night she collapsed from exhaustion. She didn't cry. She didn't stumble. Her words weren't rehearsed, they were remembered. His lawyer objected at one point, accusing her of dramatizing. The judge silenced him with a glance. Then Gloria handed the judge a folder. Inside, bank records, dated messages, and screenshots of his social media posts mocking her. The judge took his time reading each one. And the room grew colder. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Gloria called a witness, the hospital nurse who had treated her during the collapse. The nurse took the stand and recounted everything she had seen, including how the patient had no emergency contact, no financial support, and how she had asked the nurse to call him, but he refused to answer. The nurse looked at him directly and said, she was alone. He left her alone. And if we hadn't caught it in time, both mother and child could have died. He shifted in his chair, for the first time losing that confident grin. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. And for the first time, she felt like someone believed her. The judge leaned back, silent for several seconds after the nurse stepped down. Then he looked at him, no longer as a defendant, but as a man exposed. "Do you have anything to say in response to this testimony?" the judge asked. He hesitated, opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His lawyer whispered frantically, urging him to deny everything. But the damage had been done. Silence in a courtroom can be louder than a scream. And his silence said everything. The judge turned to Gloria. "You may proceed with your recommendations." And that was the moment the power shifted entirely. Outside the courtroom during recess, he tried to approach her, as if casually. "This doesn't have to be so dramatic," he said. She turned, looked him in the eye, and replied, "It's not drama. It's consequence." He blinked, caught off guard by her tone. She no longer sounded broken. No longer looked afraid. And perhaps, for the first time, he saw her not as the woman he once left, but as the woman he could no longer control. Back in the courtroom, the judge prepared to read his preliminary findings. And she sat upright, holding her chin high. She hadn't won yet, but everyone in that room knew she had already taken the lead. The second half of the hearing began with quiet murmurs, as Gloria called a final witness, someone unexpected. The doors opened and a woman stepped in, dressed in office attire, clutching a folder. She introduced herself as an employee at the financial firm where he once held a joint account with the plaintiff. Her presence alone caused him to shift uncomfortably in his seat. Gloria asked her to explain why she was there, and the woman answered plainly, "I was subpoenaed after irregular activities were found in the account." The room fell silent as she opened the folder and began presenting transfer logs. She explained how days before he left, he had quietly emptied their shared savings, routing the money into a private account under a different name. Even more disturbing, some funds had been transferred into an account belonging to another woman, one he was now dating. He funneled the family funds away, leaving her with nothing, the witness said, her voice sharp. He opened his mouth to speak, but his lawyer gently touched his arm, signaling him to remain silent. The judge leaned forward, his fingers steepled, as he asked, "Do you deny these transactions?" The defendant didn't answer. His silence was louder than denial. The courtroom buzzed with tension. What followed was a detailed breakdown of how he had manipulated finances. Gloria, with methodical precision, walked the court through every transaction, rent money redirected, hospital bills ignored, credit cards maxed under her name. With each item presented, the judge's demeanor hardened. "You had legal obligations to this woman and your unborn child," he said sternly. "And instead, you orchestrated a personal escape plan." The defendant remained expressionless, but the grip on his pen tightened, his jaw locked as if he could feel the walls closing in. Gloria rested her case with one final statement: "This is not a case of emotional misalignment or incompatible marriage. This is calculated abandonment. This is financial sabotage. And above all, this is a man who refused to accept responsibility for a life he helped create." The judge nodded, eyes sharp with clarity. "Thank you, counselor." The opposing lawyer tried to recover with a short rebuttal, but the damage was irreversible. For the first time, the courtroom recognized the full scope of betrayal, not just as an act of cruelty, but as a deliberate plan to disappear without consequence. The narrative had flipped. Now, he was on trial not just in court, but in the eyes of everyone who had believed his story. When the judge stood to deliver the temporary ruling, the courtroom was completely still. He cleared his throat and began by acknowledging the strength of the evidence, the consistency of the witness testimony, and the clear timeline of abandonment. Then he looked directly at the defendant and said, "This court finds your conduct to be not only irresponsible but negligent at a moral and legal level." The silence deepened. The words hung in the air like a weight no one dared move under. The man who once mocked her, who once left her without explanation, now sat frozen, his confidence crumbling with each word from the bench. The judge continued. He granted full temporary custody to the mother, immediate child support retroactive to the date of abandonment, and ordered an investigation into his financial concealment for possible fraud. "You will not walk away from your child," the judge said, voice steady. "Not in this courtroom." The woman blinked, holding back tears, not from sadness, but from overwhelming justice. This moment wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, final, and undeniable. And that made it all the more powerful. When court adjourned for the day, the defendant didn't look back at her. He couldn't. Because now, he was the one drowning in consequences. The final hearing came just 2 weeks later. She arrived in the same borrowed blazer, her head held even higher than before. Hope was growing fast now, bright-eyed and calm, and stayed with a friend while she stood again before the judge. This time, her hands didn't shake. She knew the truth had already been spoken. All that remained was confirmation. The judge reviewed the final recommendations, then declared permanent full custody, long-term child support, and restitution for the medical expenses he refused to cover. "This ruling reflects more than legality," the judge said. "It reflects justice." The court order also restricted him from contact until he filed for supervised visitation, under court observation. His lawyer barely spoke. He looked thinner, smaller than before. His arrogance had dissolved into a quiet shame. Outside, reporters from a small local news outlet waited, having picked up the case due to its unusual legal implications. She declined to speak. She had said what needed to be said where it mattered most. As she walked down the courthouse steps, the autumn air hit her face and she smiled, softly, freely. She hadn't just won. She had reclaimed herself. Weeks passed, and she heard nothing from him. But through mutual acquaintances, she learned he had lost his job. The scandal of the court case had rippled through his professional life. The firm didn't want the bad press. His new girlfriend, the one who had received the siphoned funds, had left him shortly after the hearing. The account was frozen. The money gone. For a man who once believed he controlled everything, he now found himself unable to even control his own narrative. He sent a message through his lawyer, dry, brief, and full of weak apologies. "I didn't think it would go this far," he wrote. She didn't reply. One evening, while picking up groceries, she saw him across the parking lot. He looked worn down, aged beyond his years. Their eyes met for a split second. He opened his mouth slightly, as if to say something, but then closed it again. No words came. No smirk. No attitude. Only silence. And in that moment, she realized something important: the power had shifted permanently. Not because she had crushed him, but because she had rebuilt herself. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need his money. What she had now was worth far more: peace, clarity, and a daughter who would grow up never doubting her mother's strength. Life after the verdict didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a breath finally released after months underwater. The paperwork was finalized, the financial accounts enforced by court order, and a new chapter began. She no longer woke up checking her phone for his name. She didn't flinch when someone mentioned him. Her mornings now began with lullabies and baby giggles, not tension and silence. She looked around her small apartment, still modest, but now filled with calm, and understood: peace doesn't need wealth. It only needs safety. Hope had started smiling more. And so had she. On weekends, she took her daughter to the park, where sunlight filtered through trees and laughter echoed around the swings. Other mothers spoke to her now. She wasn't just the girl who had been left, she was the woman who stayed. Who fought. Who endured. She began writing again, not just for blogs, but for herself. Stories, essays, small reflections on the strength it takes to rebuild when no one believes in your foundation but you. Her words became seeds for a future she never imagined, one she built by herself, with grace and grit. She enrolled in an online business course after receiving a small grant from a women's initiative for single mothers. The modules were difficult at first, especially while balancing diapers and feedings, but she never once considered quitting. Every class she finished felt like one more piece of her identity restored. With a used laptop and late-night study sessions, she began sketching ideas for a business that combined her old passions with her new life. A small service that helped other mothers prepare for legal challenges, offering guidance, templates, and emotional support. Word spread quickly in online parenting groups. Her voice, once silenced, had become a resource. Within months, she had clients reaching out from across the state. "You helped me stand up in court," one woman wrote. Another messaged, "I didn't feel alone anymore after reading your story." What began as survival was now purpose. She wasn't just healing. She was helping others do the same. Her past wasn't a shameful wound, it was a blueprint for others to follow, step by step, out of darkness. Hope's first steps were small, wobbly, and full of wonder. She clapped as she moved between furniture, her tiny hands outstretched, eyes wide with discovery. Watching her daughter grow brought a sense of joy that no court ruling, no money, no man could ever give. Every giggle, every babbled word reminded her that life had not only continued, it had flourished. The girl who once sat on the kitchen floor crying over shredded papers was now smiling from a picnic blanket, holding her daughter in the sunshine. Neighbors noticed the change. Friends who once pitied her now admired her. Even her family, distant during the hardest times, began reaching out again, their apologies quiet but sincere. She welcomed them slowly, with the caution of someone who had learned that not everyone who watches your fall will help you rise. But she didn't hold grudges. She had no space in her heart for bitterness anymore. Her life, once suffocated by silence and control, now echoed with laughter, music, and the rustle of pages turning in baby books and legal guides alike. Months later, an envelope arrived. The handwriting on the front was familiar, too familiar. She stared at it for a long time before opening. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from him. He apologized in vague and indirect words, blaming stress, confusion, and fear. He wrote that he had lost himself and hoped one day she might tell Hope that he once cared. The final line read, "Maybe we both made mistakes." She read the letter twice. Then a third time. Her face remained neutral. She placed the letter on the table, then quietly picked it up and walked to the fireplace. The flame caught quickly. She watched it burn, the paper curling, blackening, vanishing. There was no anger in her eyes, only clarity. Forgiveness, she realized, didn't require conversation. It required release. And that's what this was. She turned away from the fire and back to Hope, who was playing on the rug, stacking blocks with clumsy joy. "Come here, sweetheart," she whispered, lifting her into her arms. "We're just getting started." Years passed, and her story became more than survival. It became a voice that echoed in workshops, support groups, and community centers. She spoke not to dwell on pain, but to show what lived beyond it. Hope grew into a bright, thoughtful child with curious eyes and a love for books. She often asked about the day she was born, and her mother always told the same story, not of courts or cruelty, but of strength. "You arrived in a storm," she would say, "and helped me find the sun." Her business flourished. Her home grew warmer, more stable. She no longer feared mailboxes or courtroom doors. Instead, she welcomed each new chapter with the calm of someone who had already faced her darkest hour and written her way out. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need applause. All she needed was exactly what she had, her daughter, her dignity, and the quiet knowledge that the woman he once tried to break had become someone he could no longer reach, not even in memory.